Why is productivity slowing down? This paper investigates the causes of productivity slowdown by comparing data between 2006 and 2017 against 1996 and 2005 for 5 OECD countries. Most of the slowdown is due to TFP and capital deepening. One cause of the productivity slowdown is mismeasurement of nominal output, deflators, and labor inputs. It was found that the supply of skills is not a significant explanation of labor productivity slowdown, but technologies have disrupted this, affecting TFP growth. Labor market institutions have emerged through the introduction of digital platforms, such as the gig economy. Global trade has been a key driver of productivity growth, but perhaps its benefits have already been reaped. The decline in trade after the financial crisis is also a contributor. Another cause is the decline in business dynamism, the increase in profits and concentration, which have led to the fall in competition and allocative efficiency. There are also differing views on technological progress on productivity growth. There are two standard decompositions of labor productivity growth, the first being sources of growth, also known as growth accounting, and the second being a within-between decomposition by industry. Growth accounting separates labor productivity growth into an increase in inputs and a residual, TFP. Considering the following production function, AT corresponds to TFP. The second equation presents an application of the growth rate rules to the production function, where the growth rate in raw output per unit of labor is decomposed. The final equation is an extension to the growth accounting equation above, providing a conceptual structure of the factors that contribute to the productivity slowdown, making it possible to trace the sources of growth and thus the sources of the slowdown, whereas the within-between decomposition of labor productivity allows us to show to which extent the slowdown is pervasive, or whether it is confined to specific industries or is due to a reallocation towards low productivity or low productivity growth industries. A decline in capital deepening is due to a lack of investment. Explanations include cyclical factors such as the financial crisis leading to financial frictions, depressed aggregate demand, and a decline in government spending. Additionally, structural explanations include higher share of intangible capital, decline in competition, and globalization. The solo growth model can explain the impacts of decreasing investment. For example, as the investment rate decreases, S-bar falls, leading to the investment curve to shift down, resulting in a lower steady state.
The slowdown in labour productivity can be attributed to a slowdown in total factor productivity, otherwise known as TFP, where TFP can be understood as technological progress. The two key factors contributing to such progress include research effort and research productivity. Therefore, a decline in research productivity would indicate a slowdown in technological progress. Economists such as Nicholas Bloom and Charles Jones have studied patterns of research productivity on a micro level. Their research indicates that research productivity has fallen across various sectors of the US economy. On a firm level, they used time series data from CompuStat on publicly listed US firms and found that the average growth rate of researchers per firm increased by 6.8% between the years 2000 and 2010, though productivity fell by 10% during the same timeframe. This is as research output in cells did not substantially increase despite the increasing number of researchers. Within the medical sector, they measured research productivity as a ratio of the number of years of life saved to the number of medical publications issued, and their study indicated that the number of publications per life saved for those with heart disease has increased in recent years, suggesting that individual publications are becoming less productive. They studied this trend to continue into the late 2010s. Declines in research productivity on a micro level can explain why on an aggregate level, research efforts in the US have increased since the 1930s by a factor of 23, yet TFP growth has at times been slowing down and not increasing. On a firm level, this is accredited to time lags in translating research efforts into research output, as firms require time to adapt to new technologies discovered by researchers. Though within the medical sector, the measured slowdown in research productivity can be attributed to the difficulty in generating new ideas. Overall, the slowdown in labour productivity can be linked to the declining trend in research productivity. Understanding TFP as innovation relates to endogenous growth models such as the Roma model. The Roma model seeks to explain where technological progress comes from, unlike exogenous growth models such as the Solar model. The Roma model suggests that a constant level of research effort is required for constant growth in TFP. However, the decline in research productivity, as shown by the data, highlights a potential weakness in the Roma model. This evidence suggests that in order to maintain constant TFP growth, research efforts must be increasing to offset lags in research productivity. This has led economists such as Charles Jones to argue that the Roma model's assumption of a constant research productivity parameter runs counter to empirical evidence found on the US economy. As the Roma model seeks to apply to the US economy, this remains a valid limitation of the model.
Golden and their authors claim that a slowdown in educational attainment is an unfair explanation for the global productivity slowdown. This tends to be a go-to explanation, especially for the United Kingdom's productivity puzzle. Authors point out the hollowing out of wage distribution in the 2000s as a result of automation of the middle wage cognitive routine occupations. And Patterson and his authors also claim that this reallocation of labour is responsible for the 2/3 of low UK productivity. Moving on to the channels through which the labour institutions affect total factor productivity, the rise of the labour hoarding, the gig economy, and heightened barriers to labour mobility, and the reduction in discriminatory practices do somewhat affect total factor productivity and labour productivity. The rise of the gig economy does result in workers having access to less training regularly due to the temporary nature of the work in the industry. The increase in non-compete and no-poaching agreements ultimately put restrictions on labour mobility. The reduction in discriminatory practices leads to a more optimal allocation of labour. The factors just discussed on the last page surrounding labour mobility affect the labour market flows that we discussed in class. For example, labour hoarding prevents workers from moving to the employment area to unemployment area and slows down the rate at which workers move from the unemployment area to the employment area, as employers are not advertising jobs that would better suit their current market position, such as strategic consultants that would help them improve their outputs, and they cannot currently afford this due to the workers still being on payroll. And this also doesn't allow for the job creation or job destruction cycle to continue within the market.
Trade has historically driven productivity growth. However, according to Golding et al., with the current global trade integration and reduction, it may have contributed to 13% of the productivity slowdown. This has also been accompanied by the impact of the 2008 financial crisis, which saw a downward trend in trade, reducing productivity. Additionally, the rise in protectionism has led to a restriction in global competition and has thus had a negative impact on productivity growth. Whilst the impact of trade and globalization on human capital is debatable, with some research pointing to its benefits, there are also negative impacts of employment. For instance, Chinese import competition in the US contributed to a 25% decline in manufacturing employment, with similar impacts in European countries too, impacting labour productivity negatively. Whilst the paper provides an extensive insight of the productivity slowdown, it also presents some limitations in addressing the problem holistically. Firstly, the limited geographical scope of the paper from 5 advanced OECD countries excludes the coverage of developing economies. Also, evidence of the TFP slowdown is limited to findings from the US, so findings cannot be generalized to countries that vary in economic structure. Therefore, the paper fails to understand the productivity slowdown due to an unrepresentative sample of countries. The constrained time period of the paper may not be as relevant in providing a comprehensive picture of current productivity trends. For instance, recent events such as the COVID-19 pandemic and Ukraine-Russian war may impact productivity and its slowdown. The paper also neglects potential environmental effects. As we know, rising material costs associated with resource depletion, degradation, and scarcity can have a negative effect on productivity growth. Although there is correlation between TFP levels and capital deepening to the productivity slowdown, this doesn't directly provide an explanation for causation. Difficulties may also arise when measuring the magnitude and extent of the contributors to the productivity slowdown, with the likelihood of under or overrepresentation of factors. Finally, other variables excluded from the paper, such as welfare and living standards, arguably play a role in affecting the labour productivity slowdown. We hope this was a productive use of your time. Thank you for listening.